All right, Purple Group, Lesson 74, Homework Check. So the way that this video works for the homework check is I'm going to show you each section. I'm going to demonstrate how to do one of the problems and explain how to work through it. Then I'm going to give you the answers for each of the problems in that section. If your answers don't match, watch the part where I explain how to do the problem, and then go back and try and make corrections on your answers for that section. So you're going to pause the video while you do that. You can go back and re-watch the explanation. Then once you've corrected your answers and they match, and you understand how to do it and the answers match. It's not just that the answers match, it's that we were able to rework it the correct way. Then you can come back to the video and go to the next section, watch the explanation of that section, and check your answers and make corrections. Make sure, though, that after you get the video explanation, if you still are really lost on what to do, make sure to come over and ask one of the teachers for help. So for the first part, for part 8, you have to copy each of the problems, and then it says you have to estimate the answer by rounding the number you divide by. So the first number here, 57, means that I have to estimate about how many times will it go in here, just so I know that I have a starting point, because if you look at your multiplication table, it doesn't go up to 57s, and I don't know my 57s, and I don't know anyone else that does. So if you are looking here and we see that there's 57, in order to estimate, that means that I have to round it. So I want to round to my tens place, so I'm going to underline it, and I'm going to look next door, and since I can see that the 7 is 5 or above, that means that this is going to go up. So if the 5 is going to go up, that means that it's going to be a 6. So this is over here like in my head. So I'm thinking 6. And I have to make my closest guess as to how many times that 6 can get into 38. So what I'm going to do is, if I'm doing 384, and I need to think to myself, this is off to the side, because I have to think how many times can 6 get into 38. So I'm going to go to my multiplication table and find my 6's. And I'm going to go down and see how close I can get to 38 without going over. And the closest I can get is 36, which means that 6 times 6. So that means that 57 is going to go into 384 about 6 times. So put my 57 back here, because remember, this was just over in my head, so I was using that for estimating. So now I know that it can go in about 6 times. And remember that when I figure out how many times it can go into something, I then put my best guess estimate over here, over the ones place. So I know it's going to go in about 6 times, and then when I do the math and I do 6 times 57, I'm going to get 342. And I do my subtraction, it's going to be 42, which means that then I have a remainder of 42 over 57. So when you're working the rest of the problems, make sure that you have looked here and rounded. Use your tens place that was rounded to figure out how many can go into the first 2 numbers over here. Write your number up top and then divide like regular. So I'm going to put the answers up for the rest of the problems. Check your answers, and if you don't have an answer that matches, go back and rework the problem until your answer matches mine. So here are the answers for the rest of the problems for part 8. We have 6 and 42 57s like we did together. For B, you have 3 is your whole number, 3 and remainder of 67 93rds. For C, 2 and 5 24ths. And for D, 7 and your remainder of 69 78ths. So pause the video while you check your answers, and once you've made your corrections, go on to part 9. So for part 9, the instructions say that you have to show the equation and then also to simplify the answer. So if I leave my answer as a fraction, I'm not going to get full credit. So for A, it says, what is 3/5 of 40? So what I need to do is, this is when we make an equation, I'm changing words into numbers. So we want to know what is 3/5. So I have my 3/5. And then they say of. And when in math, when they say of, they mean times. So whenever you see the word of, you're going to multiply. And then they give us number 40 But in order to multiply fractions, I can't do a fraction times just the whole number. I have to put my hidden number 1 underneath it. And I remember that when I am multiplying fractions, it's okay that the bottom numbers don't match. You only have to make them match when you're adding or subtracting. So to multiply straight across the top, I'm going to do 3 times 40, which is 120. So I'm going to put that right there. And then straight across the bottom, 5 times 1 is 5. So this is where we were talking about where you need to simplify it, because if I just left my answer as 120 over 5, then that's not simplified, that's improper fraction. So what I would have to do, because if I remember that the fraction line can also mean divided by. So I can say 120 divided by 5. And then I can figure out that if I did 120 divided by 5, which I could do either on my multiplication chart or I could do it on a calculator, I get the whole number of 24, and that's my final answer. So when you're going to do B, C, and D, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to set up the fraction times the whole number. You have to put the number 1 underneath the whole number. And then you're going to multiply to get a fraction. Remember, you don't have to change the bottom numbers when you're multiplying. After your fraction, you do the divided by to figure out what whole number it will equal. So I'll put the answers up here in a second. Check your work and make any corrections that you might need. Okay. So here's what you have for A. We did that together, 24. For B, your whole number is 16. For C, your whole number is 12. And for D, your whole number is 32. So check the numbers that you have. If you need to make corrections, go ahead and do that now before you go on to the next section. All right, so for part 10, now that you've made corrections on the part before, they're giving you an angle. And the instructions say for each problem, make a number family with 3 letters and then answer each question. So I know first I have to do a number family. And it says with 3 letters. And so I can see that there are 3 letters here, and I just have to decide which 2 are the small numbers and which one's the big number. So if I'm looking at these 2 little parts of purple and green, and I have one big part of orange, that's telling me that the big part is going to be my big number. So my big part is K, and I can see that these 2 small numbers are going to be the letters M and N. And the other way that I know that is I know that when I add together 2 small numbers, I add them to find a big number. The same way here, if I take the piece of M and the piece of N, I can add them together and they add together to make K. So that's also how I can check to make sure that I've got the correct big number and small number. So now I use the information that I have at the bottom. So it says that angle M is 56. So I put 56 as my small number here. And then it also says that angle K is 90. All right, and then we have to figure out N. So now this is just a regular number family. We have a big number and we have a small number, which means that we have to subtract to find the answer. So once I do the subtraction, I can find that N is 34. So once you're done checking this section, make sure that you have a completed number family with all of the 3 letters and the 3 angles. For B, you should have 110, and for C, you should have 24. All right, so go ahead and double check your answers. Go back and rework any problems that you need to make corrections on. So pause the video and then come back for part 11. So for this table for part 11, I'll show you how to do both types. So when I'm trying to change a fraction to a mixed number, I have to take the bottom number and figure out how many times I can get it into the top number without going over. So I know that this is pretty small on your screen, so you can have the real one right next to you. But if I'm going down my 4s, I know that the closest I can get to 45 without going over is 44, and if I go over, I can see that it's 11. Which means that I can go in 11 times. Because 4 times 11 is 44. That's as close as I can get without going over. Now, for the leftovers, I need to know that when I got to 44, I need to ask myself how many more did I need to get to 45? And that was 1. Right? From 44 to 45 is 1. and then the bottom number stays the same. So for A, you should have 11 and 1/4. To do this one, to change from a mixed number to a fraction, I'm going to look at my bottom number, and I'm going to do 8 times 2, right? 8 times 2, and then is 16, and then up here is plus. So if I do 8 times 2 is 16 plus 7, so you should have 23 eighths. Okay, so then check C and D. For C, you should have 53 sixteenths. And for D, you should have 37 is your whole number, and then 4/5 left over. Okay, check your work. Let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, come back then for part 12. Okay, so for part 12, we have to take the first equation and use it to solve to figure out the second equation. So the first equation, they tell us that 5p is equal to 3, and I need to figure out what 1p equals, right? I have 5 times p is equal to 3, but I want to know what 1p is. So if I'm doing 5p equals 3, I know that in between here, there's a hidden multiplication sign. And I know that in order to get the p by itself, right, because I only want 1p, I don't need 5 of them. In order to get the p by itself, I need to do the opposite. I need to undo the multiplication. So instead of saying 5 times p, I'm going to divide. And I'm going to divide by the thing that I want to go away. So I want the 5 to go away, so I'm going to divide by that. And remember that in order to keep them balanced, you have to divide both sides by the same thing. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Which means now, looking back, that if I have 5 divided by 5, we know that when there's the same thing on top and bottom, they cancel out. So the only thing that's left over here is p, okay, and 3/5. So 1p is equal to 3/5. The answers that you should have for the rest of these, for B, you should have t is equal to 20 twelfths. For C, J is equal to 3/4, and D, M is equal to 1/5. So check your fractions. If you didn't have this correct for B, C, or D, go ahead and do the same thing that I did for A and redo your problems over here. Pause the video and then come back for part 13 when you're ready. Alright, so for part 13, the instructions say that you need to make a ratio table for each problem. If the problem tells about a fraction, you have to make a fraction number family. So I know that first I'm going to make a ratio table so I can organize my numbers and figure out what I need to do. So it says in a pond there are bass and catfish. 3/8 of the fish are bass, and there are 360 catfish. So I know that my categories need to be bass, catfish, and all fish. So the F here is for all fish. That's bass and catfish together. So it says that it's 3/8 of them are bass, and in the instructions it says if they tell us about a fraction, we need to make a fraction number family. So here's my fraction number family. I know that I'm going to have bass, catfish, and all fish, and they told us that 3/8 are bass. I know that my big number is going to be equal to 1, and I know that the bottom number stays the same, so it's going to be 8 on the bottom, which would make it 8 on the top, 8 on the bottom here, because for a number family it stays the same all the way across. And then here I've got 8 minus 3 is 5, so the fraction we're looking for, 5/8 of catfish. So now I'm going to take these top numbers and put them into my ratio table. So for bass I have 3, catfish I have 5, fish I have 8. The other information that they gave us from the problem was 360 catfish. So if I have 360 catfish, now I'm ready to make my ratio based on what I know. So I know that I have to pick catfish because it has 2 numbers. So let's say catfish, and let's just say fish. So catfish, I have 5, and fish, I have 8. And then I'm going to, times a fraction, I don't know, equals. And then the other one that I do know is that the second number for catfish. So I'm going to put that on the line here at the end. And when I do my division, because here it says 5 times something equals 360. So that means that I can't do the multiplication. I don't know what the times something is. So I'm going to do 360 divided by 5 is going to be equal to 72. So I'll put 72 here, put 72 here, and then going straight across, 8 times 72 is going to be 576. You may have a different ratio if you chose to do bass and catfish. So if you have bass and catfish, that's fine. Your ratio will look different as long as your numbers over here end up matching. So if you did fish, we know that fish is now 576. So I'm going to put that in for fish. And then I know that here I'm going to have to subtract, because if this is a number family, this is a small number that we're looking for. So 576 minus 360, and I'm going to get 216. All right? I'm going to have to answer the questions that how many bass, right? Number 1 here, how many bass are in the pond? So number 1 is going to be 216. And for number 2, how many fish are in the pond? Fish is 576. Okay? For B, I'm going to give you just the answers here, and then you're going to have to check to make sure that you have the correct. So for number 1, for B, you should have 42. And for number 2, you should have 56. For C, you should have, for 1, you should have 550. And for number 2, you should have 990. So if you forgot to do the questions, or if your questions don't match, go ahead and you have to check what you got in the ratio table to be able to answer these questions. And if you need help setting it up or help reading the table, make sure to ask a teacher. But pause the video here to go back and make any corrections that you would need to do. All right, so here's the last part for part 14. I just wrote out the answers for A and B, so check what you have. If you're not sure how we got those answers, make sure to ask one of the teachers or ask a friend who is able to help. But once you are done checking this, make sure that you turn your homework and your corrections into Canvas.